So guys, last night I was watching the footage from this hearing, and honestly, my jaw just dropped. I have never in my life watched a congressional hearing this chaotic, this intense. I was up until 4 in the morning rewatching clips, taking notes. And let me tell you, I felt like I had to make this video because you just cannot gloss over these moments. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General of the United States, and the performance she put on during this hearing left both her supporters and her critics completely stunned. One side is saying, finally someone is speaking the truth, while the other side is asking, what kind of Attorney General is this? I'm going to walk you through the moments that answer that question one by one. If you're ready, let's get into it. Moment number 1. The most embarrassing answer in history. 0. Before I get into this moment, let me say something. In political videos, there's usually a lot of exaggeration, people throwing around phrases like, the biggest scandal in history. But this time, there is genuinely a moment that earns that description. A congressman from New York stood up and asked Bondi a question. Simple, direct, no tricks. Madam Attorney General, you have been in office for a year now. How many of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators have you charged? The room went ice cold. Everyone waited, because the answer to that question said everything. There are dozens of powerful names in those files. Prince Andrew, Les Wexner, other billionaires, 3 million pages of documents, hundreds of pieces of evidence. What did Bondi do? Instead of answering, she started talking about something completely different. But look, they charged the president twice. The congressman cut her off immediately. I'm reclaiming my time. That's not what I asked. Bondi started going off in another direction. He cut her off again. This happened 3 times. The room got louder and louder. Finally, the congressman said something that broke the entire internet that day. Your answer is already pretty clear. 0. You've been Attorney General for a year. There are over 1,000 victims, hundreds of documents, and the number of people you've charged, 0. The room erupted. People started shouting, and I sat there thinking, how is this even possible? Moment number 2. When the FBI document changed everything. This was honestly the moment that hit me the hardest. Bondi had just said under oath, there is no evidence that Trump committed a crime. Everyone knows that. A congressman from California then pulled out a document and put it up on the screen. An official tip submitted to the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, and he started reading. I genuinely froze when I first heard this. The tipster says, I am the limo driver who drove Trump around. That day, Trump was on the phone with Epstein while sitting in the limo. He was so angry and aggressive that in that moment, I wanted to stop the car and physically harm him. And it continues. I also met a young girl who told me she had been abused by both Trump and Epstein. A few months later, that girl was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. Officers at the scene said it could not have been a suicide. The congressman closed the document and turned to Bondi. Did the Department of Justice ever speak with this person? Bondi sank into silence. The answer is no. You didn't. Why? Because this witness says something that makes you uncomfortable. Bondi stared back with fury, but she couldn't respond, because the document was right there. Pulled straight from the FBI's own archives. #BondiLied became the top trending topic on Twitter that day, and after watching that moment, I completely understood why. Moment number 3. When the survivors raise their hands. This one is a little harder to talk about because it's genuinely a heavy moment. A congresswoman from Washington was speaking. Epstein's survivors were sitting in that room. Real people. Women who had stayed silent for years and finally came here looking for justice. The congresswoman put a document up on the screen, an email sent by the victims' attorneys to the Department of Justice. It contained 32 names, and the email said clearly, "Please do not release these names to the public." What did the Department of Justice do with that email? They published it, with all 32 names, along with some of their addresses and phone numbers. In the silence of the room, the congresswoman slowly asked, "Epstein's survivors, would you please stand up?" More than 30 women stood up. Their eyes were full of tears. "Those who have still not been able to meet with the Department of Justice, would you please raise your hand?" Every single hand went up. Not one person had been able to meet with them. Then she turned to Bondi. "Can you now turn and look at those women and apologize for what your Department of Justice has put them through?" Bondi didn't turn around. She didn't even look at them. Instead, she said, "Where were you when Merrick Garland was sitting in this chair?" The congresswoman reclaimed her time, her voice shaking. I watched that moment, and something just tightened in my chest, because the cameras cut to the women in the room at that exact second. Tears were running down one woman's face. Moment number 4. The Wexner document and the 40 Minutes scandal. A congressman from Kentucky walked up to the podium with 3 documents and said, "I'm going to show you 3 documents that prove the Department of Justice has been an absolute disaster." First document, the email from the victims' attorneys saying, "Do not release these names." The department released it anyway. They redacted the attorney's name, but left the victims' names in plain sight. The second document stopped me cold. The title read, "Child Sex Trafficking Co-Conspirators." Les Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secret, a billionaire businessman, listed in the FBI's own document as a co-conspirator, not for tax evasion, for child sex trafficking. And how did the Department of Justice release this document? With Wexner's name blacked out. The congressman turned to Bondi. "Why did you redact this name?" Bondi: "We corrected that within 40 minutes. You corrected it within 40 minutes because I caught you red-handed. Otherwise, you never would have fixed it." The third document was the FBI's witness interview forms, the statements victims gave to the FBI. The documents where they named their abusers, completely redacted. The congressman went into the portal trying to see what was behind the redactions. You know what he found? Another redaction. A redaction hiding behind a redaction. Moment number 5. Answering an Epstein question. With the Dow Jones. This moment was both ridiculous and kind of telling, if I'm being honest. A congressman was laying out a very serious case. He was explaining how New York Attorney General Tish James had been targeted, how 2 separate grand juries had both refused to indict her. Then it was Bondi's turn to respond, and she opened with this. "Let me just say, the Dow Jones has now crossed 50,000. The room went quiet first. Then you could see confused smiles spreading across people's faces. Bondi kept going. "The S&P 500 is nearly at 7,000. The NASDAQ is breaking records. Murder rates are at their lowest in 125 years. 0 border crossings for 9 straight months. Someone on the Democratic side couldn't help themselves. What does the Dow Jones have to do with Epstein?" That moment became legendary on social media under the name the Dow Jones Defense. Memes were made, clips were cut and shared. People passed it around like a joke, but it really wasn't funny at all. Because this was an attorney general using stock market numbers to dodge questions about child sex trafficking victims. Final thoughts, guys. After watching this entire hearing, one question kept sitting in my mind. There are over 1,000 victims. These people stayed silent for years. They stayed quiet out of fear, out of shame, out of threats. Then they finally found the courage to speak up. They gave statements to the FBI. They signed documents. They came to that room. And what did the Department of Justice do? They protected the names of the abusers and exposed the names of the victims. They opened no investigations. They charged no one. The heaviest moment in this entire hearing for me was that hand-raising moment. 30-something women, every single one, raised her hand. Not one of them had been able to meet with the Department of Justice. I hope that one day real accountability actually comes. This file is not closed, and it's not going away.